Good afternoon, or good evening, actually. Good evening, West Ham fans. Russ and the West Ham Network. Hope you're all safe and well. We have some fascinating news to talk about in terms of football finances. Yeah. But despite the interest, we did a video earlier this week talking about Premier League clubs voting today in terms of whether to keep PSR or to adopt a new way of managing finances, one being a system called SCR, squad cost ratio. I think that's what it stands for. And the other one being TBA, which was around top to bottom anchoring. Now, it does seem, well, according to reports, the Premier League clubs met today and voted in favour of scrapping the PSR regulations, the profit and sustainability rules. Now, and in terms of the favoured approach, the squad cost ratio, the SCR, got the nod. 14 votes in favour, 6 against, which is the minimum number required to exact a rule change. And in essence, overall squad costs from next season will have to be limited to 85% of the club's revenue, although teams competing in Europe will have to adhere to the UEFA 70. So for the vast majority, I mean, at the moment this year, 9 clubs, I think, playing in Europe in the Premier League. They all have to adhere to the 70% rule anyway. So squad costs comprise player and manager wages, transfer fees, and agents' fees. Pardon me. Rules around sustainability, which set out a club's financial spending plans over the long and medium term, were passed unanimously. But anchoring, I said anchoring, which would limit everyone based on the revenue, TV and prize revenue of the bottom club in the Premier League. So last year it would have been Southampton, who got 110 million. So it's 5 times that. So 150 million pounds. That was rejected. It was voted against, with 12 against, 7 in favour, and 1 abstaining. I would assume that being Chelsea, based on previous voting patterns with this type of thing. So the new CSR rules are intended to promote opportunity for all clubs to aspire to greater success and bring the club's financial system closer to UEFA's existing SCR rules. The other key features of the league's new system include transparent in-season monitoring and sanctions, protection against sporting underperformance, and ability to spend ahead of revenues. Interesting. Strengthened ability to invest off the pitch, and a reduction of the complexity of focusing on football costs. Now, in terms of how everything was voted out, PSR was about, obviously, a club's balance sheet of all revenues over a 3-year period, where you could only lose a maximum of £100 million, I think, in total. Several clubs in very healthy financial positions were obviously happy with PSR and wanted to keep it. And those included, basically everyone who's probably well run. Bournemouth, Brighton, Brentford, Palace, Fulham, all very well run clubs. And Leeds all voted against the change. So, yeah, obviously didn't get the 14, so everyone else was like, fuck that. Obviously, under PSR, it does arguably the more ambitious clubs. I'm thinking about the likes of Villa, Newcastle. They have lots of constraints under PSR. They couldn't necessarily, Newcastle, for example, they've got the richest owners in the world, but under PSR, they were sort of hamstrung really to spend the money. So it's sort of, if anything, it's sort of really curtailed what they could do. But obviously now with SCR coming into play, it seemed a natural progression, in all honesty. I mean, that's how UEFA run it. And, I think, although I think they are going to put it at 85%. So if you're not in Europe next year, you're going to benefit from not being in Europe, weirdly. Not really at the same time, because you'll get more revenue in Europe, so that you'll have a higher revenue percentage. Being in Europe means you take more money anyway, so naturally it'll probably mean you'll have more to spend anyway. So regardless of whether it has to be 70% or 85%, if you're not in Europe, you'll have more dollar anyway. So obviously Chelsea and Aston Villa are both given heavy fines by UEFA for breaches in last season. That's when the limit in Europe was about 80%. Now it's gone to 70%. The Premier League have added some wiggle room too, with a multi-year rolling allowance of 30% that allows clubs to spend beyond the limit. It allows clubs to invest ahead of revenue and variance or sporting underperformance. So if you've had if one of the greedy six has had a bum season, they've got sort of still a 3-year caveat. So it's sort of, you still have that sort of PSO overhang. It's not done on every season. There is wiggle room in that, as always with these things. But it also, the interesting thing is, under CSR, it allows you to overspend 1 year. So say, for example, West Ham got taken over by a Saudi prince, for example, and he wanted to plumb in a shitload of money, and he can put in a shitload of money under SCR, it's not CSR, SCR rules. So, you've got that wiggle room in the premise that if he puts the money in, then next season, say they got, you got into the Champions League and therefore your revenue's gone up anyway, so you can spend 70% of a bigger number of revenue across, although maybe the previous year you didn't get there. So that's the idea of them bringing it in. So it allows it. I think it allows competition. It does allow the likes of the more profitable sides to spend more, rather than having sort of a salary cap. And I think the TBA, the whole anchoring system, would have ended up being really, there'd have been a lot of, although it seems a fairer way, I think there would have been, in essence, a salary cap imposed on the Premier League. And I think there would have been multiple challenges to that. So SCR seems a sensible sort of stretch forward, so to speak. It's believed that an assessment is to be made each March, and the allowance is crucial to determine possible sporting sanctions ahead in the same season. The 85% marker is known as the green threshold. Spending above that, and you get a penalty fine, although it will be less punitive than UEFA's. The red threshold is 85 plus. Beyond that, it's a fixed 6-point reduction. Deduction one, which increases by 1 point per every 6.5 million spent over the red threshold. So, every club in essence will start with 85% plus a 30% allowance. So in effect, they could spend 115%. And any club that spends above 85% will have a fine, but they would need to be in excess of 115 to lose points. So again, there's that extra caveat for, if you wanted to thought, fuck it, we're going to go for it this year, there is the ability to spend over 100%, 115% that year and take a fine. Beyond 115%, then that's when the points come into play. Now, those percentages will eventually change. It won't be 85%, and I imagine it'll be closer towards what UEFA have at 70%, but those changes won't be made until 27-28 season. And if a club spends 105% of their squad next season, it means they've used 20% of their allowance already. And so for the 28-27, their maximum spend before potential sanctions is 95%. Clear as mud, I hope. And if a club spends less than 85%, they can increase the allowance again to the maximum of 30%. That's in the 2018-2019 season. I'm just trying to see if there's any votes they said about the anchoring. Not really who voted for that, who voted against it, but you'd assume the greedy six would vote against that. West Ham, I think, were pro the anchoring, but that didn't happen. I did say anchoring. So that's it. It's goodbye PSR, but it's goodbye. But it's hello SCR. So we're going to get hit over the head by SCR regulations now rather than PSR regulations. However, SCR does seem to be a bit more based on sort of success rather than blanket sort of losses in essence. So, if you have a decent season, decent couple of seasons, your revenue goes up, therefore you can spend more money. So there is actually an incentive to spend, really, in the premise of you will get more revenue. If you're in Europe, you get more revenue. If you're in the Champions League, you get more revenue. If you're in Europa League, you get more revenue. If you're in a cup, you get more revenue. If you have new front of shirt sponsors, you get more revenue, and therefore then you can spend more. So we'll see what happens. But I think it's a halfway house I mean, the other sanction, as I said, with the TBA, the anchoring one, that would favour, I think, probably mid to lower Premier League sides, not necessarily the top six or so, because it would hamstring them. I mean, you know, Chelsea couldn't spend £1 billion. They could only spend half of that. And obviously, it means you could spend up to that amount. Doesn't that mean you have to spend that amount? But in the same way, you know, you could work on SCR regulations quite nicely to you know, almost give you a fallow year, and then next year we go for it, and then you can actually have that 30% added on. So, for example, if you're going to get, I don't know, a new shirt sponsor and maybe a new shirt manufacturer in 2026, 27, you have all the extra revenue you could bring in, and therefore your revenue would increase. Anyhow, clear as mud, I hope. Tomorrow we've got match day morning. Ahead of the game on Saturday, in the afternoon rather, and we've got Gym Lads from TikTok fame. Anyone who's on TikTok, he's the one who does the Yorkshire puddings. Big Bournemouth fan, big TikTok fan as well, and so he's going to be on talking about Bournemouth and making us all very jealous, because they do seem to be a very well run club. And yeah, apart from that, take care, everyone. Stay safe. Stay warm. It's fucking freezing out there, my friends. And I will see you on the flippity flop. Much love. Peace out, my foes.